This is Gary. It's Wednesday, August the 12th, 2020. Thank you for joining me for this study. I want to begin it a little differently than most. I'm going to give you a sentence with a blank at the end, and I want you to write it down if you want to, or just say out loud, or think how you would fill this blank in. The sentence is this: the Lord is blank, or you could say God is blank. So what are the first things that come to your mind? I sat down and was jotting down a few ideas, and the first one I had is God is love. I thought of 1 John, where it says God is love, or I could say God is loving, or the Lord is loving. Another one that came to my mind was the Lord is faithful, or the Lord is merciful, or the Lord is kind or good. You know, there could be 1,000 different ways we could fill in that blank. I would imagine none of us filled it in the way that Moses did in Exodus, I believe it's 15:3, where Moses said, the Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. I'm not sure any of us would think of God in those terms today, but we probably should. That God is a warrior, that God isn't just sitting on his throne, watching all the events unfold and just waiting to see what we're going to do. But God is also an active God, a God who's engaged in the activities in the world. And there's, as we'll see today in Joshua chapter 10, that God is a God who goes out and gets involved in what's happening. And we need God's involvement today, and we need to understand how God works, and this is one of the ways that he does. That he is a warrior. The word Lord that Moses uses is the word that we call Jehovah or Yahweh. It is the proper name of God. It's the I am name of God. It means the all-existing one, and that God just needs nothing but himself to exist. There's never been a time when there wasn't God. And so he's talking about this powerful, amazing God. Let's go to Joshua chapter 10 now, and let's see what we're going to find today. In chapter 10, the king of Jerusalem, who is one of the Amorite kings, is upset because of the fact that Gibeon, as we saw last week, has now got a treaty with Israel. And he understands how they had defeated Ai, and now how he thinks they're coming after him. And it's true, Jerusalem was not under their control. It would be very soon. And so he calls together four other kings, and these kings then form a coalition, and they're going to go against Gibeon. Now, Gibeon was a large city. It was a royal city, and it had some very fierce fighters within that city. But what happens is the king of Gibeon sends to Joshua and says, hey, this coalition, these guys are coming against me. You know, we need your help. And so when we get to Joshua, we see that He gathers his troops. In verse 7, so Joshua and all his troops, including all his best soldiers, came from Gilgal. So he leaves and he heads that way. Now, as he's on his way, remember, Joshua made a treaty with someone that he was actually supposed to destroy. But he's got to honor the treaty, okay? And so now he's honoring this treaty, and he's on his way. And now watch what happens in verse 8. The Lord said to Joshua, so God speaks. Now we know that we have a God who speaks. And he speaks to Joshua, and look at what he says to him now. Do not be afraid of them, for I have handed them over to you. Not one of them will be able to stand against you. Wow, think about what a promise. That the first lick of battle hasn't taken place. Joshua hasn't even got to where all these guys are. He's probably not even sure how many of them there are. And God says, the battle has already been won. You've already got victory. I've already handed them over to you. And so verse 9 says that Joshua caught them by surprise after marching all night from Gilgal. And the Lord, now watch this, the Lord gets involved in this. I love this part of it, okay? So the Lord threw them into confusion before Israel. And he being God, he defeated them in a great slaughter at Gibeon, chased them through the ascent from Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And they fled before Israel, and the Lord threw large hailstones on them from the sky along the descent of Beth Horon, all the way to Azekah, and they died. More of them died from the hail than the Israelites killed with the sword. So now God's involved. God said, I'm going to give you this victory, and now God's actually involved. Sometimes it's his army, sometimes it's his people that he gives the power to defeat the enemy, but sometimes God acts on our behalf. I'm hoping and praying that during this corona time that God's going to act on our behalf, that we're going to see it's an amazing thing that God has done. Okay, then let's go on. Verse 12. On the day The Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel. Joshua spoke to the Lord in the presence of Israel. Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon over the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on its enemies. There has been no day like it before or since when the Lord listened to a man, because the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua and all of Israel with him returned to the camp at Gilgal. So what does Joshua do? He needs more daylight. He's got this enemy. If we were going to read through the entire chapter here, we're going to see there's a battle. There's different places that they have battles, and so at different sites. And so he needs more daylight. And so we know that the sun didn't stand still. But now think about what's taking place here. Think about the power of God. We know that the earth spins on its axis, and it goes at a certain rate. And if it went at a different rate, then nothing would work the way that it works. But so what we've got happening here is, in God's miraculous supernatural power, he's able to slow everything down but keep everything intact. I mean, it's more than just the thinking of the sun stopping or the sun staying in place so they've got more daylight so they can finish the battle. It is the activity, the miraculous power and activity of God that amazes us here. And so we see God working on their behalf and working for his people to accomplish his will and his purpose. So then we go through and we would see, if we looked at the rest of it, as I said, Joshua defeats these different 5 kings at these different locations and defeats all of them and totally wipes all these different nations or all these different kingdoms out. And then when we get to the end of the chapter, verse 41 said, Joshua conquered everyone from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza and all the land of Goshen as far as Gibeon. Joshua captured all these kings and their land in one campaign. That's why he needed more daylight. Because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned to Israel, to the camp at Gilgal. I remember reading a story one time that someone came to Billy Graham and said, we have to pray in this battle that God's on our side. And Billy Graham said, no, actually what we have to pray is that we're on God's side. We need to make sure that our hearts are clean, that our hearts are pure as they should be, and that any battles that we face, spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, or even social battles that we're facing today, that we are on God's side in this, that he is our commander-in-chief, and that we're following him, and he's directing us in everything that we do. Hope you've had a great day. Hope this has been a good study for you, and look forward to seeing you next week.